Please, ma'am, have my seat.
Thank you, my child.
The winter wind howling off the city streets was brutal, turning breath into thick clouds of steam the moment the bus doors hissed open. Inside Route 42, the air was barely warmer, smelling of damp wool and old metal. 12-year-old David Brown stood near the middle aisle, his legs shaking with exhaustion. He had spent the last 6 hours lifting heavy boxes at an under-the-table grocery job, earning a few crumpled dollars to help his mother pay the heating bill. Every muscle in his body begged him to sit, but the bus was completely packed. Around him, the adult commuters were locked in a world of deliberate blindness. To his left, a man with white earbuds kept his eyes glued to a glowing phone screen. To his right, a woman adjusted her heavy coat, staring blankly at a video game on her device. They looked down on purpose, using their screens as shields against the world around them. Then, the bus ground to a halt, and an elderly woman stepped carefully up the stairs. Mama Esther was 75 years old, with neat gray braids tucked under a knit cap. She leaned heavily on a wooden walking cane, her knuckles white as she tried to balance a fragile paper grocery bag filled with bread and green vegetables. As the bus jolted forward, she stumbled slightly, losing her footing. None of the passengers looked up. Nobody moved to help. To them, she was just an invisible inconvenience. But David did not hesitate. Forgetting his own aching body, he stepped forward and caught her arm. He placed his other hand gently on the seat frame, leaning toward her with a respectful, open-handed invite. "Take my seat, ma'am," David said softly, his young face full of genuine concern. Mama Esther gasped slightly, her hand flying to her chest in pure surprise. Tears of emotional warmth touched her eyes as she looked at the young boy, who actually saw her when everyone else looked away. David had no idea that this frail woman holding a loaf of bread was the mother of Marcus Vance, the most powerful billionaire in the city. Her son's massive tech fortune could easily buy every single bus on the road. David did not know a miracle was coming. He only knew that a grandmother was tired, and it was his duty to help. As Mama Esther slowly settled into the blue plastic seat, David took a step back, letting his hand drop into the pocket of his oversized jacket. The coat was a faded gray, split along the pocket seam, and missing its top 2 buttons. Beneath it, he wore a dark cotton hoodie that had once belonged to his older cousin. The cuffs were frayed into loose threads that he constantly pulled at when he was nervous, and the fabric was worn so thin that the biting winter air cut right through it. His sneakers were flat at the heels, offering almost no protection against the freezing metal floor of the bus. He looked like any other kid from his neighborhood, just trying his best to stay warm in a city that felt entirely too cold. Standing in the aisle, David felt the familiar ache return to his lower back and knees. His body felt much older than 12. For the past 6 months, his life had been a repeating cycle of school bells and heavy lifting. While other kids in his class went home to play video games or eat warm after-school snacks, David walked straight to the back alleys of the local markets. He swept floors, washed greasy dishes in freezing water, and hauled heavy crates for shop owners who paid him in crumpled $5 bills. He never complained. He knew exactly where that money was going. Lately, the view from their small kitchen window had grown increasingly bleak. His mother worked 2 jobs, but her paychecks never seemed to stretch far enough to cover the rising costs of city life. Just last week, David had found a final notice from the electric company sitting on the kitchen counter, stamped with bright red letters. The threat of darkness hung over their home like a heavy cloud. He knew his mother secretly cried in her bedroom when she thought he was asleep, worrying about how they would survive the winter without heat or light. That was why David worked until his fingers were numb and his throat burned from the cold. Every dollar he earned went directly into a cracked ceramic mug on the top shelf of their kitchen cabinet, saving up for the overdue bills. It was a heavy burden for a young boy to carry, and it had taught him to view the world with cautious, serious eyes. He knew that survival required sacrifice. Yet, as he watched Mama Esther carefully adjust her heavy grocery bag, a soft smile finally broke through his tired expression. No matter how hard his own life was, his mother had always told him that poverty was never an excuse to forget your manners. Giving up his comfort for someone else did not cost a thing, and seeing the relief on the old woman's face made the ache in his legs feel just a little bit lighter. Mama Esther sat with her back straight against the plastic seat, slowly catching her breath as the bus rumbled over the bumpy city streets. Up close, David could see the gentle details of her face. Her skin was lined with the deep wrinkles of a long, full life, and her kind eyes held a soft, watery shine. Strands of silver gray hair peeked out from underneath her thick knit cap, woven into neat braids that coiled like a crown around her head. In her right hand, she tightly gripped the curved handle of her wooden walking cane, which looked old and worn from years of steady use. Her thick winter coat was dark and heavy, but it looked just a little too large for her frail, shrinking frame. With her left hand still pressed firmly against her chest, she looked up at David with a look of pure wonder. It had been a long time since anyone in this crowded city treated her with such gentle respect. To the other commuters on Route 42, she was just an old person slowing them down, a shadow they could look past while they scrolled through their digital worlds. Just a few feet away, a man in a sharp business suit stared straight ahead, his ears blocked by plastic headphones, completely ignoring the way the elderly woman's grocery bag bumped against his knees. The air around them was thick with their shared silence, a cold indifference that felt even sharper than the winter wind outside. Yet, inside this bubble of modern apathy, Mama Esther's gratitude felt like a sudden burst of warmth. Her fragile fingers reached out, resting gently for a second against the rough fabric of David's faded jacket. Her touch was incredibly light, like a grandmother checking on a child, and her chest rose and fell with a deep, relieved sigh. She adjusted the brown paper bag resting on her lap, making sure the fresh loaf of bread and the green vegetables did not spill onto the floor. Every small movement she made showed how vulnerable she truly was in this fast-moving world, yet her expression remained proud and full of dignity. She kept her eyes fixed on David, silently studying his tired face and his worn hoodie, deeply moved by the realization that a child with so little comfort of his own was the only one willing to share it. The bus groaned loudly as it turned a sharp corner, the old metal walls rattling against the freezing wind outside. Mama Esther looked up at David, who was swaying slightly with the movement of the bus, his hand tightly gripping the overhead metal bar. She shifted her heavy paper grocery bag to one side, clearing a small space on the seat next to her. "Come now, son," Mama Esther said, her voice soft and warm like a wool blanket. "Squeeze in right here, or at least take the very next empty seat that opens up. A young man shouldn't have to stand on tired legs after a long day." David smiled politely, but he shook his head gently. "That is okay, ma'am. I am fine right here. My mother always told me to make sure our elders are completely safe and comfortable first." Mama Esther's eyes softened even more at his words. As the city lights flashed past the dark windows, she began to ask him quiet, gentle questions. She asked about his school, what he liked to study, and what he had been doing out so late in the freezing cold. David answered every question with natural manners, always adding yes ma'am or no ma'am at the end of his sentences. He spoke softly so he would not disturb the other passengers, but he did not hide the truth. He casually mentioned his after-school odd jobs and how he was trying to help his mother keep the lights on at home. He spoke about his family's struggles without any bitterness, treating the hard work as just his simple duty. While David talked, Mama Esther listened intently, nodding her head as she took mental notes of his character. She noticed the serious, honest look in his eyes and the respectful way he carried himself despite his worn jacket and frayed hoodie. She saw a rare kind of integrity in him, a beautiful light that poverty could not dim. David had absolutely no idea who she was, and he did not expect a single thing in return for his kindness. He was just being a good neighbor to a tired grandmother, completely unaware that every polite word he spoke was painting a perfect picture of his golden heart in her mind. The old bus finally groaned to a complete stop, its brakes screeching loudly in the dark, icy transit center. Outside, the world was completely black except for the flickering yellow streetlights that buzzed overhead. The winter storm had left a dangerous mess behind, covering the entire pavement in a thick layer of freezing slush and hidden black ice. As the remaining passengers rushed off the bus, completely focused on getting to their own warm destinations, they splashed through the puddles without a care. Mama Esther gripped her wooden walking cane tightly, looking out the glass doors at the slippery ground with a worried expression. Her fragile legs trembled slightly. David noticed her hesitation right away. Even though his own house was still a long, cold walk ahead, and his own muscles felt like lead, he knew he could not just leave her behind. "Let me help you down the steps, ma'am," David said gently, moving to stand right beside her. He carefully took the heavy paper grocery bag from her arm so she could focus on her balance, cradling the bread and vegetables safely against his chest. Once they stepped off the bus and onto the dangerous platform, David did not pull away. Instead, he patiently tucked his arm through hers, locking his elbow with Mama Esther's frail arm to create a human shield against the ice. Together, they took slow, deliberate steps through the freezing slush. The winter wind whipped around them, biting at David's bare wrists and his thin, frayed hoodie, but he kept his footing firm. He used his own flat sneakers to test the ground ahead, guiding her around the slickest patches of ice and steadying her whenever her walking cane slid against the frozen concrete. Mama Esther leaned heavily on the young boy, her breathing shallow in the freezing air, but the fear in her eyes quickly faded. She looked down at how carefully David matched her slow pace, deeply touched that a 12-year-old boy was treating her safety like the most important thing in the world. David kept his eyes on the ground, carefully leading Mama Esther toward the concrete bus shelter at the edge of the terminal. He figured they would sit on the cold metal bench and wait for someone to pick her up, or perhaps find a phone booth. But before they could even reach the curb, a sudden flash of bright headlights blinded them. Headlights from 3 large, midnight black SUVs swept into the icy transit center, their tires crunching loudly against the frozen slush as they came to a sudden halt. David froze, his heart instantly hammering against his ribs. He instinctively pulled Mama Esther half a step behind him, his grip tightening on her grocery bag. In his neighborhood, a caravan of mysterious dark vehicles usually meant trouble. But the doors of the vehicles quickly clicked open, and several tall men dressed in sharp, identical suits and winter coats stepped out onto the ice. They looked like professional security guards, their eyes scanning the dark terminal before they immediately rushed toward the elderly woman. "We found her," one of the guards called out into a small radio on his wrist. Before David could even think about what was happening, a tall man stepped out from the back seat of the middle vehicle. He did not wear a faded jacket like David or a simple knit cap. He wore a long, elegant charcoal wool coat over a tailored dark suit. His face was pale with worry, his breathing heavy as he rushed across the slick pavement, completely ignoring the icy puddles ruining his expensive leather shoes. It was Marcus Vance, the city's most famous tech billionaire CEO, a man whose face David had only ever seen on giant billboards downtown. Marcus had been frantically tracking his mother's location all evening after. Learning she had snuck out for an independent grocery trip on public transit, he looked incredibly relieved as his eyes locked onto Mama Esther. "Mom!" Marcus cried out, his voice cracking slightly with emotion in the freezing air. "You completely terrified me. Why didn't you let the driver take you?" Mama Esther smiled gently, her hand lifting from her chest to greet her son. David stood completely frozen in his worn hoodie, his jaw dropping slightly as he looked from the billionaire to the sweet, elderly woman he had just helped off the bus. The pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place, and David realized that the quiet grandmother who had shared his long commute was actually part of the wealthiest family in the entire city. Marcus Vance rushed forward and gently took his mother by the shoulders, checking her coat and her face to make sure she was completely unharmed. Mama Esther patted his cheek with a soft smile, then turned her head and pointed a wrinkled finger toward David. She told her son exactly how the young boy had stood up for her on the crowded bus when everyone else ignored her, and how he had safely guided her through the dangerous ice. Hearing this, the billionaire looked up, his eyes softening as he stared at David. He noticed the boy's thin, frayed hoodie and his worn gray jacket that was missing its top buttons. Marcus was deeply overwhelmed that a child with so little comfort had used his own body to protect his mother. Wanting to show his gratitude the only way he knew how, Marcus immediately reached inside his expensive charcoal coat. He pulled out a thick, heavy leather wallet and extracted a large stack of crisp $100 bills. The money was worth more than David's family could earn in a whole year. "Thank you, young man," Marcus said, extending his gloved hand to push the cash toward the boy's chest. "Take this. You have no idea how much your kindness means to our family." David stared at the green paper bills. For a fleeting second, he thought about the cracked ceramic mug on the top shelf of his kitchen cabinet. He thought about the bright red letters on the electric bill and his mother crying in the dark. This money could instantly solve all their problems. But then, he remembered his mother's words about pride and doing what was right. He took a firm step back into the slush, folding his hands behind his back. "No thank you, sir," David said, his voice small but remarkably steady in the freezing air. "I cannot take that." Marcus blinked in complete surprise, his hand freezing mid-air. He was a man used to getting whatever he wanted with his wealth, and he could not understand why a poor kid in a frayed jacket would turn down a small fortune. "Why not, son? You earned this. You kept my mother safe." David looked the billionaire straight in the eyes, keeping his posture respectful but strong. "I did not give her my seat for a price, sir, and I did not walk her through the ice for a reward." My mother taught me that respecting our elders is a duty, not a job. You do not charge a person for doing what is right. Mama Esther's eyes welled with emotional warmth at David's words, and she placed her hand over her heart once again. Marcus stood entirely frozen on the icy concrete, his jaw tight as he slowly lowered the cash, realizing he was standing in front of a 12-year-old boy with a heart of pure gold. Marcus Vance stood completely still in the freezing winter air, his hand holding the thick stack of bills dropping slowly to his side. The icy wind howled around the transit center, but for a long moment, nobody spoke. The billionaire CEO looked at David, really looking at him this time. He saw the boy's shivering shoulders, the worn gray jacket with the missing buttons, and the flat sneakers soaking in the cold slush. Yet, the 12-year-old boy stood with his chin up, his posture filled with a quiet, undeniable dignity that money could never buy. Marcus had spent his entire adult life in corporate boardrooms, dealing with people who always wanted something from him. He was used to the idea that everyone had a price. But looking at David, Marcus felt a sudden wave of deep shame. He realized that by offering a fistful of cash, he had treated a beautiful, selfless act like a simple business transaction. Cash was just a temporary fix for a kid this special. $100 bill would eventually be spent, but the immense integrity this boy carried inside his frayed hoodie was worth far more than a quick reward. Slowly, Marcus slid the stack of money back into the deep pocket of his elegant charcoal coat. He took off his thick leather glove and extended his bare hand, not to offer charity, but to shake David's hand with genuine respect. When David took it, Marcus's grip was firm and warm. "I apologize, David," Marcus said, his tone changing from a powerful businessman to a grateful son. "You are completely right. Your mother raised an incredible young man, and I mean no disrespect to her lessons." Mama Esther stepped forward, her wooden cane clicking softly on the frozen pavement. She placed her warm hand gently on David's shoulder, nodding her approval. "He is a good boy, Marcus," she whispered softly. "A truly wonderful boy." Marcus smiled, his eyes resting on David with a new kind of determination. "A temporary reward is not enough for what you did tonight, David. A young man with your character deserves a real foundation for the future." He reached into his pocket once more, pulling out a sleek metal pen and a small notepad. "Can you give me your mother's phone number? I promise you, this is not the end of our encounter. I want to speak with her tomorrow." David hesitated for just a second, the cold wind biting at his bare wrists, but looking into the honest, gentle eyes of Mama Esther and the respectful face of her son, he knew he could trust them. He carefully recited his mother's cell phone number while Marcus wrote it down in neat, precise letters. Marcus tore the page out, folded it safely into his coat, and gave David one final, reassuring nod before guiding his mother toward the warm, glowing lights of the waiting luxury vehicle. The next evening, the rhythmic clinking of the old radiator did little to block out the howling winter wind outside David's small apartment. David and his mother sat at the worn kitchen table, sharing a simple supper of warmed soup. The kitchen was dimly lit, and the bright red notice from the electric company still sat on the counter, casting a heavy shadow over their conversation. David had already told his mother about the elderly woman and the billionaire son at the transit terminal, but they both assumed it was just a strange, fleeting moment in their difficult lives. Suddenly, a polite but firm knock echoed from the front door. David's mother looked up with a worried expression, her hands nervously tightening around her dish towel as she walked over to open it. When the door swung open, David's eyes widened. Standing in the dim hallway were Marcus Vance and Mama Esther. The billionaire CEO had traded his formal charcoal coat for a simpler jacket, and his mother smiled warmly, her gray braids looking neat as she rested her hand on her trusted wooden cane. "Good evening," Marcus said softly, stepping inside after David's mother politely invited them in. "I am Marcus, and this is my mother, Esther. We came to thank you in person." They all sat down in the cramped living room, where the faded cushions and mismatched furniture stood in stark contrast to the visitors' wealthy background. Marcus looked at David's mother, his eyes filled with immense respect. He explained how David's beautiful integrity had saved his mother from a dangerous fall on the icy concrete. "Your son refused my money last night," Marcus said, his voice rich with admiration. "He told me that respect is a duty, not a business transaction. You have raised an incredible young man." David's mother looked down, a soft, proud smile brushing across her tired face, though her eyes still held a lingering worry about their financial struggles. Marcus noticed this right away, but he did not pull out a stack of cash. He knew this family carried too much pride for handed-out charity. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folder containing official company documents. I am not here to give you a handout, Marcus explained gently, changing his tone to a supportive neighbor. I run a technology firm downtown, and we desperately need someone with your strong values to lead our community outreach division. It is a secure, high-paying administrative role with excellent health benefits. I would love for you to join our team. David's mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as tears of relief finally broke through her eyes. Before she could even process the life-changing news, Marcus turned to David and handed him a sleek, gold-bordered certificate. And for you, David, Marcus smiled. This is a fully funded, lifetime scholarship to the city's top preparatory academy. You have a golden heart, and you deserve the finest education to help you change the world. Mama Esther reached over, placing her warm hand gently over David's, her chest rising with emotional warmth as she watched the heavy cloud of poverty finally lift from the young boy's home. 2 decades later, the harsh, freezing wind still blew through the city streets, but inside the Grand Convention Hall, the atmosphere was filled with incredible warmth and bright, golden light. Hundreds of people sat in the rows of seats, their murmurs fading into a respectful silence as the stage lights adjusted. Walking up to the wooden podium was David Brown. He was no longer the shivering 12-year-old boy in a frayed hoodie. Now a grown, well-educated man, he wore a sharp, tailored navy suit and carried himself with a quiet, steady confidence. David looked out at the massive crowd, his heart swelling with emotion as he adjusted the microphone. Behind him, a massive banner unrolled, displaying the name of his life's work in bold, elegant letters, the Esther Legacy Foundation. 20 years ago, I was a tired kid riding the Route 42 bus with nothing but a few crumpled dollars. And a heavy heart, David began, his deep voice echoing clearly through the speakers. I thought the world was a cold, indifferent place where everyone looked down at their screens. But a single encounter on a moving bus changed everything I thought I knew about survival and success. David officially announced the launch of the multi-million-dollar initiative, explaining how the foundation would build safe community youth centers, fund after-school tutoring programs, and provide lifetime educational scholarships for thousands of underprivileged kids living in his old neighborhood. He spoke passionately about giving the next generation a real chance to succeed, ensuring that no child would have to work grueling hours in the freezing cold just to keep the lights on at home. As the entire audience erupted into loud applause, David lowered his eyes to look directly into the very front row. Sitting there comfortably was Mama Esther. She was much older now, her silver-gray braids completely white under the soft lights, but her kind eyes still held that same beautiful watery shine. Her hands, resting gently over the curved handle of her familiar wooden cane, trembled slightly with proud emotion. Next to her sat her son, Marcus Vance, who clapped with a deep look of admiration for the man David had become. Mama Esther slowly lifted her left hand, placing it firmly over her heart in that familiar, heartfelt gesture. A beaming smile broke across her wrinkled face, and she gave David a gentle, knowing nod. Looking back at her, David felt a tear of pure gratitude touch his eye. He smiled back, reminding everyone in the grand hall that true wealth is never found in a bank account, but in the choices we make when no one else is watching. A single empty seat on a crowded public bus had completely rewritten his family's history, proving that a simple act of respect can truly change an entire city forever.